WJLA 24/7 News. This is Let's Talk Live.
Yeah, good conversation going on here. Author, speaker, trusted advisor Steven Gaffney is a leading expert on change management, honest communication, and high-performing teams.
Oh, boy.
Honest communication.
He is here with us today to give us some tips on how to work with stubborn people in the workplace. I mean, I don't know who, but, you know, sometimes people can be difficult to work with.
All the time. Can't even get a breakfast order right.
None of us are difficult, right? It's always the other person.
No, exactly. So,
well, first of all, let's define what a difficult person is.
That's a great point.
Because what I may define it as, what you may define it as, it could be different.
Yeah, how do you define it? How would you define it?
How do I define a difficult person? Somebody who doesn't want to do their job. They want you to do it for them.
Yeah, and sometimes people say somebody who doesn't agree or somebody who doesn't see my point of view, but that's okay.
That's not true.
But that's okay, yeah.
You know, or somebody who's always stubborn has to be their way, or somebody who's self-righteous. That's generally what people consider.
Right.
Somebody who's difficult.
But yeah, but like somebody who's always like, hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do that? You know?
Or just, I mean, for me, it's just people that sometimes don't do their job completely.
Yeah, they don't carry their weight.
Right.
But the reason why I asked you that question is because people throw out these terms, but they really don't define it.
Right.
And it really is personal to us.
Yeah.
For example, if you had somebody say, this person is difficult, and you go talk to them and say, no, they believe in what they believe in, and I can work with that person. In fact, the key is we have to learn how to work with and deal with all kinds of people, because difficult people can also be at home.
Right.
So it's not easy to define, but that's the first step, is to take responsibility in how we're defining it.
I mean, and let's be honest, that's what I teach my 10 and 7-year-old.
Yeah.
You might not always be exactly the same as others, but you have to work together. You may see it differently, so why wouldn't that translate to adults, obviously? But I guess, what are some of the key elements to building a cohesive group or team? I mean, if you have these differing opinions or different personalities, how do you bring them together?
Well, I think the first thing is to really understand their point of view. Most people look at another person and say, well, if I were them, I wouldn't do, but the problem is we're not them.
Right, exactly.
So one of the concepts I teach is called be them. Be that person. It's beyond walking in their shoes. Think about what motivates them, what drives them, and what's it like to be them. And then you can start to address it, because we all blame the other person, if not outward, inside our mind. And so we have to realize, if we're being that person, maybe that makes sense. For example, if you're having a difficult time with your boss, be them for a moment. Or your spouse, be them. What's it like to be them? And often we say, again, you know, if I were them, but we're not them. So a lot of that is understanding. It sounds simple, but so often I've experienced where people just are upset and they explain their point of view instead of looking at the other person's point of view.
And also, I don't think people are always bad.
Right.
You know, I think that we have become a society where we think because you don't agree or because you don't do this, that, or whatever, then you're bad. And it's not bad. Like you said, it's just different.
Yes.
So it's like not everybody is doing whatever they're doing out of malicious intent. Sometimes it's just like you put on your pants the right leg first, maybe somebody puts it on the left leg first. It's not wrong. That's
how I get teams to become a high-performing team. If they understand each other and there's generally a goal, and I've come up with 12 essential elements of a high-performing team, but you can use it at home. And one of them is to be them, because we really don't consider that. But there's so many other things, just even as a technique. Whoever asks the questions controls the conversation, right? You all know this, you're experts at that. And so what you can do is just redirect the conversation. Here's an example. Recently I was at dinner with a bunch of buddies of mine, and gun control came up. And I was like, oh, this is not going to be good. And sure enough, it started to not be good, because no one's listening to each other. They're just starting to restate their opinion. So what did I do? I said, hey, how was your weekend? You know, you redirect the conversation. You might have to say it a few times, but we can often redirect the conversation. And this is really important with the holidays coming up, because we all have relatives or loved ones that are challenging to deal with.
But you kind of do that with your kids, though, right? Like if the kids start to kind of squabble, you know, he's touching me, he took my toy or whatever, then you could say, hey, what'd you do in school today?
No, I say, what about gun control? Just kidding. But are there certain topics then that should be avoided in the workplace, with politics being so toxic now? Is that something you should probably
here's the thing. The problem I have with that, and everybody will probably check the box, and I'm sure there's some company guidelines, but the problem with that is our country is founded on debate. We learn from each other by debating. So actually, I like the gun control debate because I learn, or politics. I like to think about the other person's point of view. That's how we learn. But unfortunately, we get so positional. And the reason why is we suffer from two things as human beings: confirmation bias and investment bias. First, confirmation bias. When we as a human being come up with an opinion, we tend to look for all the evidence that's consistent with that. That's why we often label a person, and then somebody else says, well, that person's not that way, and then you see it from their point of view and you realize, wait a minute, it isn't really that way, but we build the case.
Okay.
The other thing is investment bias, and this is something rarely people talk about, and that is when you have an opinion, we build a case, we all build a case, and then we become invested in that opinion. And if somebody says you're wrong or debates us, what inevitably happens is if we suspend our judgment, our belief, and we start to take on that maybe we're wrong, we might have weeks, months, or years that we've been upset with this person that proves to be, maybe I got it wrong. I'll give you an example. I had a lady in a session of mine who had an estranged relationship with her mother for 10 years and hadn't talked to her mom for 2 years.
Wow.
She went through the session and she came home and she fixed it. Because inevitably, you start considering the other person's point of view.
Right.
And so that's the big thing. But it's very challenging because you see this with our politics. People become so invested in their point of view, they double down. Because if they're wrong, think about the ramifications. But we all can be wrong.
Yeah.
Man.
Wow. That's a lot to think
The
about.
takeaway is try to put yourself in that other
Try
person.
to be them.
Yeah, don't think,
So
if
try
I
to
were
be
him,
Tony
I
or Lex.
would. You need to
So
be...
he should try to be a 10-year-old or a 6-year-old,
Well,
I'll tell you,
7-year-old.
the most important one we haven't even gotten to is just be honest. You know, I've written a book about it, but the point is this: when you don't know what to say or the person's very stubborn and self-righteous, just share what's on your mind in a non-blaming point of view. For example, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. How can I bring up another perspective? Or how about this? Are you open to seeing another perspective? Now, inevitably, people say, yes, but, and then they go on with their opinion, and then you can sometimes tell, you know what, they're not okay with it, and you just change the subject. But sometimes when you have to bring up something, you have to say, look, it's difficult to bring things up. How can I bring something up without you getting defensive or upset? So if everybody forgets everything out of what we've talked about, the biggest thing is what we don't say to each other. It's getting that unsaid said. So what we're not saying, we need to get that said in a non-blaming way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kit said what's not being said in a non-blaming way.
Yes.
I got it. All right, we got to take a quick break. Steven Gaffney, thanks so much for being here with us.
Yeah,
Very
good
insightful.
stuff.
Hopefully take a little lesson away from this. We have more Let's Talk Live coming back right after this.